Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and for this week's weekly deck series for Best of 3, we're actually going to be revisiting a list you guys requested from the Best of 1 series. So I made a black-white Awaken the Erstwhile deck not so long ago that uses Lich's Mastery and Awaken the Erstwhile to actually win the game. However, it was tuned for Best of 1, so the sideboard included a lot of tech options for just having Best of 1 in mind. So I have actually gone into the sideboard for this one and changed it up a little bit so that it is actually more fine-tuned for the Best of 3s. So I'm going to go quickly through the deck. If you want to go check out the Best of 1 deck as well, it is down in the description below. You can check out that one. It'll have in the description of that video as well the tuned list for Best of 1. But it's mostly just sideboard changes, so if you have seen the deck previously, it's going to be basically the sideboard as far as changes are concerned. So I guess I could start with the sideboard for that reason alone, because I'm sure quite a fair few of you have checked out this deck before. But if you haven't, then stay tuned and I'll go through this list anyway. So the sideboard changes. Basically, we had a lot of haymakers in the sideboard for Best of 1, so there was a lot of really weird one-offs that were really good in fringe situations, but not good in all of them. So we had things like Profane Procession and things like that in the list. So I've actually ended up cutting out quite a few of the strange, less used options, and actually included a fair few more options in terms of like interacting with our opponent in a best of 3 situation. So we have our 3 duresses here. So I actually ended up going with more hand disruption because control is kind of the worst matchup for us. We actually include an extra duress. For that we can take cards from their hand, make sure that we get to resolve whatever we want. It's our version of a counter spell in Orzhov essentially. Also included the drill bits as well. It's a 3-mana Thoughtseize, which is pretty bad, but to be honest, there isn't really a better option in the format right now. I don't really want to be running Mind Rot effects because our opponent might end up being full of lands, essentially, which we don't really care about. We want to get the important cards, so we sacrifice an extra discard here, but the upside of it is that we actually get to pick what card gets removed, so this takes creatures as well as non-creatures for our duress, which is kind of cool. Extra Moment of Craving to bring in versus the aggro lists speaks for itself for the most part. We have a Sorcerer's Spyglass to name Planeswalkers with. Ixalan's Binding is very good to lock out Planeswalkers. You can also lock out some of their more important creatures if you know that there are 4 of, or they're what the deck is built around. You can just bind them straight out the way, and that's pretty good. Josu Vest Lich Knight as an alternative win condition in case we have to worry about things like Unmoored Ego naming Awaken the Erstwhile. We still have a fair few alternative win cons in the list. Unmoored Ego is really just not that good of a card. Speaking of Unmoored Ego, if they do go and name Awaken the Erstwhile, we'll always have one in the sideboard as well. So Mastermind's Acquisition can go and search up any of the sideboard stuff if we want to leave it in there. 2 copies of Eldest Reborn, also technically an alternative win con. We can steal our opponent's Planeswalkers and ult them, and we can win that way as well, which is kind of cool. Axis of Mortality is still one of the fringe cards. I did consider cutting it, but it does have some really sweet applications all the same. It's a 6-mana enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may have 2 target players exchange life totals, which means if your opponent has more life than you, you actually gain life, which works really well with Lich's Mastery, because whenever you gain life, you draw that many cards. But the real application for it is actually to go and grab it out of the sideboard with Mastermind's Acquisition if your life total is below 0, which Lich's Mastery allows you to do. So if your life total is pretty low and you drop a Mastery, your opponents will probably hit you down into minus totals, and all you have to do then is go Mastermind's Acquisition, grab Axis of Mortality, and then you exchange your life total with your opponents, and yours is going to be a minus, theirs isn't, so you swap them over, and they lose for having less than 0 life. It's kind of cool. Fall of Thran is really good for control matchups. Destroying lands is absolutely wonderful. We can hold lands in hand as well, because Reliquary Tower from our land base, which is hiding behind the sideboard, allows us to have no maximum hand size. So what we can do, one of the ways that I have repeatedly won against control, is simply by playing nothing. If your opponent plays nothing, then they have to discard to hand size. We don't, so they just make their land drops and pass. we don't make our land drops and pass if we want to, or we do just land and pass. And they hold up in their counter spells for as long as they want, trying to get us to play something that they can counter, and we just wait on it, drawing duresses and our drill bits as time goes on, so we end up powering up as much as our opponent does, so it's really nice there. And if they overcommit to the board, we wipe their lands. We have plenty of lands left in hand to just make our land drops every turn, so we end up coming out on top with Fall of the Throne, as long as we plant around it. One Lich's Mastery, again, if our opponent unmoored egos us, we have one in the sideboard to grab with the Mastermind's acquisition, so they straight up cannot ego away our win con. Ethereal Absolution as a bit of graveyard hate. It's also a nice way to swing the Erstwhile in our favour as well, because we will be giving our opponent a few 2/2s most likely when we cast this card, so we can have something like Ethereal Absolution or even the Immortal Sun, which turns our creatures into bigger threats and our opponents into lesser ones, but it is here as well for graveyard hate. If your opponent's running like a low to the ground strategy, Ethereal Absolution will just like instantly kill a lot of creatures. A lot of the Explore package in Golgari will get eaten by Ethereal Absolution. You can hate on their graveyard with the 4 mana ability there, and as well, you can literally just win with 1 mana tokens if it comes to that as well. Finally, the Immortal Sun is here as well, so that we can shut out Planeswalkers. We got 2 copies, one in the main, one in the side. We want to bring these in against like Esper Control and things like that. So super powerful, really good with Lich's Mastery for the extra draw, really good with Awaken the Erstwhile for the exact same reason. So super awesome. So that's the sideboard for those who have seen the deck before. For those who haven't, let's go through the main board here. So the idea behind the deck is to play Lich's Mastery, which is a 6 mana enchantment with hexproof, which means it can't be targeted. The only way to kill Lich's Mastery is Discovery Dispersal, Cleansing Nova, Rampage of the Clans, and River's Rebuke. 2 of those spells are not played in Standard at the moment, so we really only have to worry about Discovery Dispersal and Cleansing Nova. If our opponent somehow manages to cast the other 2 that I mentioned, then good for them, and they'll get a game out of us, but they won't get another game, because we just don't have to play Lich's Mastery in this deck at all, so something to be aware of. So, it also says whenever you gain life, you draw that many cards. So this is kind of the ability that we're going to be leveraging in this deck. We want to be drawing lots of cards. The way that we do that is a little bit through our removal. We have Moment of Cravings to get rid of little creatures. They gain 2 life as well, which will draw us a card with Lich's Mastery. Or draw us 2 in this case, because we gain 2 life. Vraska's Contempts allow us to exile a creature or a planeswalker and gain 2 life, drawing us 2 cards. The main thing to draw as cards, though, is actually our cantrips. We have 4 copies of Revitalize, which are a 2 mana gain 3 and draw a card. When Lich's Mastery is out, it will draw us 4 cards because of the life gain. And then we have Ritual of Rejuvenation that gains us 4 life or 5 cards with Lich's Mastery, which is pretty sweet. We also have Consecrate Consume, which is an interesting card. It's another cantrip that allows us to go through our deck. We do draw quite a fair bit through, so it's very hard for our deck to not have a good opener. The only thing that really ends up being a factor is maybe the land count, but we typically don't get mana screwed all that often, so it's not something to worry about too much. But Consecrate is a little bit of graveyard hate. If your opponent find finalities or they have Arclight Phoenix or something like that, you can exile one of the targets out of their graveyard to draw a card, so they get less value and you get to redraw your Consecrate. It's pretty cool. Consume, though, is the main reason for this card being run. Consume is a 4 mana sorcery. Target player sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control, and you gain life equal to its power. So, this is here to hit drakes, which are very big creatures, and will draw us our entire deck if we manage to successfully hit one off of a Lich's Mastery. But the primary target for Consume is actually Carnage Tyrant, because outside of our Wraths and our Settles, there's not really much of an opportunity to kill them. We do also have a Detection Tower in the land base as well, so that we can deal with hexproof creatures. It is an option that's there for us, because we really don't want to have a Lich's Mastery out with untargetable creatures on the opposite side, so being able to take care of them is super important. 3 copies of Duress, as we mentioned in the sideboard part. We actually bring these in for basically the main control matchups. We want to have a game against control in game 1, so 3 copies of Duress allows us to do that. It might actually be too many copies, because creature matchups these days are more popular, so duress doesn't necessarily hit everything there, so that's something to be aware of. 4 copies of Mortify allow us to destroy a creature or enchantment, so Wilderness Reclamations and Searchers Canters are going to die with this, but mostly it's here as just straight up creature removal, which is quite nice. So the main build around is actually Mastermind's Acquisition. It's a 4-mana sorcery, allows us to search our library for a card and put it into our hands, so this is essentially 3 extra copies of every single card in our deck. All it means is we have to pay 4 extra mana for whatever spell that is, or cast it the next turn. That's kind of how you could see this. It's a 4 mana tax to have your 5th, 6th, and 7th copy of Mortify, in that kind of sense. It also allows us to get our sideboard tech out of the side. If it does turn out to be a bad matchup for us, we can actually go in to the sideboard with the second option here, and get some of those cards that we would bring in during games 2 and 3, if they do end up become useful. So like Sorcerer's Spyglass, to name Teferi, and things like that. We can bring those in if we get the opportunity. It's also a good counter bait as well, so we can use this strategically in that sense. 2 copies of Settle the Wreckage to exile all attacking creatures, really good against the Golgari matchups. It's not so good against the Sultai ones though, because they do get Hydroid Crisis, but we're not really that bothered about our opponent drawing too many cards, because they really, their top end is creatures, so we have plenty of options for them, and planeswalkers, we have Vraska's Contempts and Immortal Suns, so the stuff that the Krasis would draw into is not really particularly too bad for us, so we are running 2 copies of Settle the Wreckage, but primarily we actually have Kaya's Wrath here to sweep the board. 2 white and 2 black, very easy to cast in this deck. The only times you wouldn't be able to do that is if you've been unfortunate enough to draw your Detection Towers or Reliquary Towers too early. It's one reason to maybe cut the Detection Tower and put in a Plains, but I find this to be quite useful against Carnage Tyrants. Really important for that kind of stuff, and your opponent's probably going to bring them in games 2 and 3, so something to be aware of there. But yeah, that's essentially the deck, guys. The mana base, pretty simple. Mostly an even split here. 6 plains, 7 swamps, 4 copies of Godless Shrine, 4 copies of Isolated Chapel. We really want to have double white and double black on turn 4 if we can manage it, and we do have a lot of doubles in the 4-drop slot here, so having the double white and double black is pretty important. So it's one argument to cut the Detection Tower, but I think that the deck maybe suffers more for not having it than it does just potentially ruining a Kaya's Wrath on 4, because of course we do have the Settled Wreckages if this isn't castable, so yep, that's essentially the deck, guys. I should really speak about the Reliquary Towers. These are not very good in most decks, but this one, it is absolutely crucial that you have a Reliquary Tower at some point during the game. It says you have no maximum hand size and adds colorless mana. So the way that we actually win the game is by using Awaken the Erstwhile to discard all the cards in our opponent's hand and all of our cards in our hand. So we break the synergy by having more cards than our opponent, generating more 2/2s than them, essentially. So we want to be drawing way above 7 cards if we can manage it with our Lich's Mastery and Reliquary Tower to stop us from having to discard. So we just draw tons of cards, discard them all, and then we have a lethal swing. All we have to worry about is our opponent top decking a board wipe. That is literally it. So if they are the kind of deck that has a board wipe on the top deck, you have to be aware that going all in might actually kill you. So, as we mentioned, alternative win con, we have Josu Vest, which is essentially a mini Awaken the Erstwhile. We can play that just off of a single Mastermind's Acquisition if we have one left. So, try to make sure you always have an acquisition left, so that if the Awaken the Erstwhile plan doesn't end up panning out for you, you at least have an option to rebuild and go again. Okay, guys, well, make sure to check out the matches. This deck is not terribly easy to pilot, but it is a lot better than it maybe looks. It does look like some turbo jank, but I assure you it is a pretty good deck that can stand up to the meta right now. So I do recommend playing it because it is a lot of fun. It does require a fair few rares and mythics though, so only play this one if you really, really want to play it, or maybe you have most of the cards anyway. Certain cuts that you can go down. You know, some of the sideboard tech isn't actually necessary, we could say. Like, you don't technically need a second Awaken the Erstwhile, but you have to worry a little bit about Unmoored Ego and things like that. So if you want to check out the best of 1 version, if you are a best of 1 player, then the link is down in the description below for the video on that one. But other than that, guys, make sure to like and subscribe. Hit that little bell icon so you get notifications when videos go live in the future. I hope you've all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.